The Army is sending its new strategic mid-range fire system, better known as Typhon, to Japan for the first time. It's only a training exercise, but it shows, at least partially, how the Army plans to fight in the Pacific, and it introduces a new tool that could change how the Army fits into joint operations across the Indo-Pacific. Typhon gives the Army something that it really hasn't had before, a long-range land-based strike system that can hit targets on land and sea, and it does this by firing Tomahawks and the SM-6 missiles. This system, alongside others like Dark Eagle and the Precision Strike Missile, or the PrSM that's fired from the M270 and HIMARS, is part of a broader push by the Army to stay relevant in a region where ships and aircraft usually dominate the conversation. Welcome back to Task and Purpose. I'm Kyle, and today we're talking about what Typhon is, what it actually does for Army capabilities, why it's heading to Japan now, and why that's making China and Russia a bit upset. Thanks for being here. Let's get started. But first, let's talk about Odoo, because running a business is hard enough. You shouldn't need 5 different platforms just to keep things moving. Odoo brings it all into one place: your website, your inventory, your sales tools, all fully integrated and connected. Need a website? Pick a theme, drag and drop what you need, and you're up and running like that. Odoo's built-in AI even helps write your product descriptions and summaries so you don't waste your time sitting there staring at a blank screen. Behind the scenes, inventory is just as simple. You can see what's in stock, what's shipping, and what's delayed, all from one dashboard. Automate vendor reminders, pay receipts, and set delivery schedules with just a few clicks. It even syncs automatically with your e-commerce and sales apps. With Odoo, everything works together so you can spend less time managing tools and more time growing your business. Start today at odoo.com. That's ODOO.com. Your first app is free, and we would like to thank Odoo for sponsoring this episode. Typhon is officially called the Strategic Mid-Range Fire System. It's part of the Army's Long-Range Precision Fire System that also includes the PrSM, and that's again fired from the M270 and HIMARS, and Dark Eagle, which we talked about not too long ago in another video, so you can go check that out if you want. It consists of a few key components. First, a mobile command post and communication center, which provides command and control for the battery. Then a power generation system, which consists of trailer-mounted generators designed to support the launcher and fire control systems in remote or austere environments. And finally, a trailer-based launcher equipped with 4 Mark 41 vertical launch system cells, the same kind that are used on Navy ships. Each Typhon battery consists of 4 launchers that can each fire 4 missiles, which means a total of, go ahead, you can do it, that's right, 16 missiles, and they can fire 2 types. The first is the Tomahawk land attack missile. These are subsonic, terrain-hugging, GPS-guided, and travel at roughly 880 kilometers per hour, or about 550 miles per hour. They have a range of up to 1,600 kilometers, which is just under 1,000 miles. Most variants carry a 450 kilogram, or roughly 1,000 pound, high explosive unitary warhead, which is just a single large blast charge instead of a cluster of bomblets. It is highly effective and proven against fixed infrastructure like radar stations, command posts, and airfields. In recent years, the Navy and Army have been integrating new targeting capabilities, including multi-mode seekers, which just means they can use different types of sensors to track and identify targets more effectively, and it can also give them real-time retargeting to give the Tomahawks the ability to hit moving targets as well. That said, it remains relatively slow and GPS reliant, making it vulnerable to jamming and modern integrated air defense systems. The second is the SM-6, a supersonic missile originally built for air defense, but now with a secondary role in anti-ship and land attack missions. It reaches speeds of up to Mach 3.5, or roughly 4,300 kilometers per hour, which is about 2,670 miles per hour, depending on the launch conditions. While its exact range hasn't been officially published, most estimates put it at 320 kilometers or about 200 miles. The SM-6 is equipped with a blast fragmentation warhead and uses an active radar seeker. This makes it more effective against high-speed aerial targets like aircraft, surface ships, and in some configurations, even ballistic missiles. Its versatility makes it a pretty valuable tool for layered defenses and maritime strike, though its range is far shorter than the Tomahawk. The whole system is designed to be C-17 transportable, deployable in austere environments, and able to launch strikes using targeting data from other services, satellites, or even allies. The C-17 is surprisingly capable. It can operate from runways as short as 3,500 feet, or about 1,070 meters, as long as the surface is relatively firm. For comparison, a fully loaded Boeing 747 typically needs around 10,500 feet to take off. That said, austere doesn't necessarily mean primitive. These runways still require careful site prep and aren't the kinds of places you can just drop into without planning. In truly remote environments, especially those with soft or unimproved strips, deploying Typhon becomes significantly more complicated. While most discussions around Typhon focus on airlift, it's also worth mentioning that the Army operates its own fleet of more than 100 logistics and transport vessels that are crewed by Army mariners. The fleet's readiness is not ideal, and by some estimates, a significant percentage is just not seaworthy, but in theory, these ships give the Army a way to move systems like Typhon between island outposts or pre-position them in forward areas. That flexibility could be especially important in the Indo-Pacific, where getting supplies ashore often depends more on what can dock or land on the beach anyway than what can fly in. We may cover more about the Army's underappreciated maritime force in a future video, so if you want to hear about that, let us know in the comments. To understand why all of a sudden the Army and Marine Corps are developing longer range weapons now, we have to rewind back to 2019, which is the year the United States exited the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Almost immediately after that, the Army moved to fill a capability gap that it had been barred from addressing. The treaty, signed in 1987, banned all ground launch cruise and ballistic missiles with ranges between 500 and 5,500 kilometers, which is about 310 to 3,400 miles. And that was regardless if they carried nuclear or conventional warheads. It just banned everything in that range from the ground. It was originally designed to curb the deployment of Soviet nuclear missiles in Europe, but it effectively blocked the US Army from fielding conventional, land-based strike systems with meaningful reach. The US ultimately withdrew after accusing Russia of violating the agreement by developing and fielding a banned missile system, the 9M729, which Washington said undermined the treaty's core purpose. Because the INF Treaty banned all ground-launched missiles in that range band, the Army had to rely on the Air Force and Navy for any strikes beyond 500 kilometers, again about 310 miles. Once that restriction disappeared, the Army got to work. That's where Typhon comes in. It's one of three big-ticket missile systems, the first being the Precision Strike Missile, or PrSM, which replaces the Army Tactical Missile System, or ATACMS, and flies about 500 kilometers. Typhon fills the 1,000 to 1,600 kilometer range, or roughly 620 to 1,000 miles. And then you have the Dark Eagle, which is the Army's hypersonic missile, and that can hit as far as 1,725 miles away, or about 2,775 kilometers. By plugging this gap, Typhon gives the Army the ability to conduct deep strikes and maritime interdiction without relying on the Air Force or the Navy. It also strengthens the Army's argument that it deserves a central role in future conflicts, even those that happen in a maritime theater. And while the missiles themselves get most of the attention, Typhon is also about creating a flexible, road-mobile fires platform that can survive in a contested environment like what might exist on a small island. That's what the Army sees as its comparative advantage: mobility, survivability, and the ability to integrate with joint and allied targeting networks in real time, like they're a ship or an aircraft, but based on land and manned mostly by enlisted soldiers. In short, the Army wants more than a seat at the table. It wants to be, as always, one of the major players calling shots from the ground. Typhon gives soldiers the ability to strike ships, air defenses, and infrastructure and anything else they can reach without waiting on air or naval support. While the Marine Corps is developing its own land-based missile system, Nemesis, which we've covered and you can watch that, to hit ships from remote island, the two approaches are more complementary than competitive, and they're aimed at expanding the joint forces' overall reach and flexibility in contested environments. Typhon is part of the Army's argument that land-based missile batteries can do some of the jobs that ships or aircraft used to do, but they can do it cheaper and with more staying power. Mobile launchers can hide, disperse, and fire without exposing billion-dollar platforms like a B-2 or an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. And that logic is not new for the Army, because in the Cold War, which we love to talk about because everything crazy you think is happening now already happened in the Cold War. But anyway, in the Cold War, the Army used the same reasoning to justify systems like the M65 atomic cannon, which is more well known as Atomic Annie, and the M28 Davy Crockett. Both of them fired nuclear warheads and were primarily manned, as always, by enlisted soldiers who they would apparently trust with a nuke, but not a hot plate in their rooms, and it gave the Army and NATO leaders a nuclear option without firing a missile from a faraway silo or a prowling sub. These Cold War weapons were not practical by any stretch of the imagination for dozens of reasons, but they gave the Army a seat at the table, much like Typhon, Dark Eagle, and the Prism do today. The SM-6 and Tomahawk are combat proven, and while the Typhon system isn't, it has been tested. One big advantage of using existing missiles vice developing new ones is that the development takes far less time and it's a lot cheaper. The first live fire test happened just in 2023 at the White Sands Missile Range, where the Army launched both a Tomahawk and an SM-6 from the Typhon launcher, which validated, obviously, the system's basic functionality. In 2024, it deployed to the Philippines for Exercise Salaknib. I really am sorry for that one, but I could not get that no matter how much. Anyways, and that was part of the Army's expanding posture in Southeast Asia, and it marked the system's first overseas deployment. Then in July of 2025, it participated in Exercise Talisman Sabre in Australia. This time, the Army fired the SM-6 at a boat which was set up to mimic the electronic signatures of a military vessel, and it sunk it, demonstrating a credible land-based anti-ship capability. It was also one of the first times the Army used a system like this in a forward-deployed setting across the Pacific outside of traditional US test ranges. Now the Army is deploying Typhon to Japan for Exercise Resolute Dragon 2025. It's a temporary deployment, but it is symbolically important. Japan is already investing heavily in its own long-range fires programs, with things like upgrades to the Type 12 surface-to-ship missile, the planned acquisition of Tomahawks from the US, and the development of their own hypersonic glide vehicles. Hosting Typhon sends a message that the US and Japan are aligning their capabilities and preparing to operate together using distributed, survivable strike networks. None of these deployments have been permanent so far, but each one has tested a different piece of the system. Command integration, expeditionary movement using aircraft and other things, joint targeting, and live missile fires. And they're building toward a future where long-range Army missile systems like Typhon aren't an experiment, but they're part of the everyday playbook that commanders have at pretty small levels, to be honest, like brigade and stuff. That's pretty small. As one can imagine, China and Russia weren't really happy when the US announced it was sending Typhon to Japan, even if it was just temporarily. Chinese foreign military spokesperson Guo Jiakun stated, "China always opposes the United States deploying the Typhon mid-range capability missile system in Asian countries." Russia's foreign ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said, "We view this as another destabilizing step as part of Washington's course toward ramping up the potential of ground-based shorter and intermediate-range missiles for the purpose of deploying such system in various parts of the world." That's just a quote. I don't know what the hell she was really talking about. That's just a word salad. But then she went on to say it was part of a dangerous pattern of US escalation as Russia continues their 3-day special military operation in Ukraine. That pushback is to be expected, but it isn't just about Typhon that they're so upset about, it's more about what it represents. Typhon puts mobile land-based strike capability back into the Pacific along with the Dark Eagle and the Marines Nemesis. It's already been tested in the Philippines, Australia, and now it's going to Japan, which, if you've ever looked at a map, is really close to China. With the range that the Tomahawk and even the SM-6 have, Russia could be reached, and China is certainly within range, and that's just something that, no adversary is ever going to be okay with. We certainly wouldn't be in the United States, but Russia and China, they aren't either. We can point the finger, but we all do it. But with Typhon and others in there, it forces our adversaries to adjust their targeting, rethink their assumptions about us, and they have to start considering US ground forces as part of the maritime strike equation, which typically you're just kind of looking at ships and aircraft, not really land batteries, but now they have to. It also undercuts the monopoly that countries like China and Russia thought they had on long-range land-based fires. China has been investing heavily in systems like the DF-21D and DF-26 ballistic missiles, specifically designed to hold US carriers and bases at, arm's length. In their recent military parade, which is happening pretty much as I record this, they showcased several more models, and even the DF-61 showed its face, as covered by our friends at TWZ. Russia, meanwhile, has deployed its very own systems like the Iskander, which is confirmed to be dual capable, meaning it can deliver nukes, and Caliber, which is potentially nuclear capable, and they've deployed those to strategic buffer zones. The US has long had global reach that nobody else on the world has had, and we recently demonstrated that during the Midnight Hammer strikes in Iran, where we flew a bunch of B-2s all the way around the world and dropped bombs and came back. But anyways, systems like Typhon bring that reach down to the unit level. It's one thing to know that bombers and ships can strike from a distance, it's a whole other to face land-based launchers that can hide behind forests or in forests, behind ridge lines, or just be scattered across islands, which makes them really hard to hit. I wrote this script, and Savvy, as always, edited the video, and today I am wearing our Call for Fire shirt. Let's call for fire shirt. It's just a funny shirt, man. It's just kids sitting around playing with like a bear. That guy's got a radio pack, and oh look, it's a field artillery gun. They're gonna call some fire on their friends. If you want it, you can go get it at store.taskandpurpose.com. Use code ActuallyWatch for 10% off. If you have any comments, concerns, questions, anything you got, go ahead and send them my way in the comments. If I see them, I'll get back to it. Other than that, I've got nothing else for you guys. As always, I'm Kyle, your friendly ginger producer man. You are all dismissed, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for being here.